Here's another game I got a free copy of for the purpose of doing a review, this time provided by publisher X+, and surprise, it's not complete garbage for once. I was actually looking forward to this one as it has a look that reminds me of Mega Man, and the gameplay appeared to have a pacing and general focus on keeping things simple and straightforward. Those aspects turned out to be true, and Bat-Boy is actually a fun and well-designed game. Unfortunately, it stopped short of being truly great for several reasons, most of all its easy difficulty and short length. It's okay for an indie game, but it left me wanting more in the end, not because it was so good, but rather because it didn't feel like it was nearly enough. The story follows a group of high schooler sports enthusiasts who are also secretly sports-themed superheroes. They're visited one evening by a powerful mage from another dimension who kidnaps and brainwashes each one. Now the sole remaining member of the team, Bat-Boy, has to save his friends. The whole game goes hard on its sports aesthetic, with each level representing a different theme in both the environment and the enemies, who are usually represented as pigs. You've got pigs bouncing on basketballs, field kickers with footballs, pitchers throwing baseballs. They've got it all. It's a pretty funny and enjoyable style. The retro-styled graphics also look great. It's not gonna top some of my favorites like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, for example, but Bat-Boy does a great job at evoking that old-school look while still managing to have a style all to its own. The animation is solid and the artwork is cool. Really good stuff. However, a big complaint I have is that sometimes the background and environment art aren't very clear. For example, I can't tell here that this is supposed to be impassable. This is a rather small complaint that rarely becomes an issue, but it did crop up more than once. The music is awesome too. Much like the graphics, it is, again, not the greatest I've listened to, but plenty solid and still really good. I'm always a sucker for chiptune music, so mileage may vary for you, but it basically sounds as good as the game looks, so take that as you will. The best way I think I can describe the gameplay is kind of like Mega Man, but with a focus on melee attacks and deflecting projectiles. Most projectiles can be batted back to the opponent with good timing, and you can even aim the shot at up or down angles. You can also deflect yourself with a well-timed jumping attack, allowing you to bounce off of enemies and obstacles. It's a simple gameplay foundation that ends up working fairly well. Just like in Mega Man, defeating a boss rewards the player with a new ability, most of which are tied to a shared stamina gauge. These include a long-range grapple hook, a fast-moving bull rush, and a bouncing basketball projectile, among several others. Unfortunately, most of these extra abilities are very gimmicky, and they either don't serve much of a purpose outside of very specific circumstances, or they can be pretty overpowered and allow you to skip some segments entirely. Your base abilities are already plenty good enough to deal with the challenges ahead, so adding on these extra moves just feels like overkill. It would have been more interesting if you could only choose one or two abilities to take with you, and the player would need to work around that limitation. Or, better yet, if the game featured multiple playable characters, each with their own pros, cons, and special moves. As it stands, by giving our titular character everything, you mainly end up bloating the gameplay and little else. The few exceptions, I'd say, are the wall jumping and being able to throw your bat, which actually feel closer to a natural extension of your base abilities, but everything else just feels like needless additions. While the game as a whole is pretty good, enemy variety, good platforming, even the bosses are cool, the big problem I have with it is that the difficulty is practically non-existent, and the game is way way too forgiving. There are some challenging segments, especially towards the latter quarter of the game, but the stakes are really low because checkpoints are very frequent and you have infinite lives. You can basically brute force your way through the game without trying too hard, and you'll do just fine. It's pretty stupid because each time you die counts as a strike, so you would figure that after 3 strikes you'd have to restart the level, but you can just keep going on forever without any consequences. I know most people these days are averse to having an extra life system in video games, but it works in a game like this because it creates pressure and tension. It pushes the player to do better and overcome a challenge. By eliminating that, you remove a lot of the stress and excitement that an action game like this is supposed to give, so it ends up being boring. This could easily have been solved by having multiple difficulties that remove several checkpoints, implements limited retries, and maybe even changes some of the enemy positions. But all you get is the normal game, a speedrun mode which eliminates cutscenes, and a speedrun plus mode that starts you off with all of your abilities already unlocked. Those are cool features, but they don't really do much to affect the main game. Not to mention that, on top of all of this, there are a ton of health and stamina upgrades to really make you overpowered. And you can even take health potions with you to use on the go. Like, man, isn't this game already easy enough? None of this is to say that the game is necessarily a walk in the park. Some segments are a little challenging, and a few boss fights will take multiple attempts. However, you'll still easily breeze through the game in about 4.5 hours. Maybe you can double that time if you want to explore and look for secrets, but there's still not much here, and at its worst, it can get boring. There aren't any level-specific challenges or a boss rush. The game is so bare bones. Again, to be clear, it's not a bad game. The foundation is there for something potentially great, but there's not a whole lot of meat here. It can be a minor distraction at best, but it'll be forgettable for most. Thanks for watching my review on Bat-Boy. I really wanted to like this one more, honestly, but there's just not enough to it.